Welcome. It is a Monday. Hope you had a happy and healthy Independence Day weekend. I'm Shawn Drochar. This is Sandy Clough. Sandy and Shawn with you on Mile High Sports. Danny Bailey is the man behind the camera, putting everything together for you. Thanks so much for Danny for everything that he does. And it literally would be everything because Sandy and I just sit here and talk. And we'll do that first as we head towards the Denver Nuggets. Sandy, the Nuggets obviously faced with a critical offseason. They watch Kentavious Caldwell-Pope walk, goes to Orlando, had a nice post on his Instagram today thanking Denver and its fans for the time that he had there. Second championship he's won with two separate teams. Goes on to the Orlando Magic trying to win a third, one of the more interesting teams out east for sure. Now the Nuggets are scrambling and they make the move, reportedly multiple outlets, including our own reporter, who we'll have a chance to have on tomorrow in Ryan Blackburn, about Dario Šarić, the originally a lottery pick, tail end of the lottery back in 2014. Right. 12th overall pick, talented player, 2 years, $10.6 million. Plays a style that I think you could describe as, especially for Nuggets fans, European, a la Nikola Jokic, a guy with a very high basketball IQ.
He is a very good international player. There's no doubt of that. We have seen him at his best in international play.
Injuries at one point derailed him, cost him a season, but then got his bearings back and has played as a pretty effective bench player who, at his size, at 6'10", 225, can fill a lot of roles. That appears to be what the Nuggets want to do. When you look at the drafting of Drouin Holmes II, when you look at the addition of Šarić, when you look at the versatility of Peyton Watson, obviously when you're talking about what the Nuggets are going to do around their high-paid four players, now that starting five broken up, versatility is going to be key. For Šarić, this is a guy that can do a lot of stuff and maybe step in either at the 5 or at the 4, with maybe Holmes at the other position, giving the Nuggets a little more versatility and at least the hope that they can get 15 minutes a game where Nikola Jokic doesn't have to be on the floor during the regular season.
I think between the two of them, they should be able to manage that. There's a little bit of a question, and I guess the Nuggets are in a position where the phrase beggars can't be choosers does apply, where you don't have a pure backup setter. You have kind of a 4/5 in Holmes, a 4/5 in Šarić. So there isn't the traditional or tremendous shot blocking center. Now, with Golden State plays kind of a European style, right? Wouldn't you say? And with the Warriors last year, Šarić averaged 8 points, 4 rebounds, a couple of assists, 17 minutes a game. He was a decent player for them off the bench, has some offensive versatility, different things he can do inside and outside. From time to time, he's played well against the Nuggets in the past, and I imagine he and Jokic would have the Serbian and the Croatian would have some things in common, would develop a rapport rather quickly. But it still leaves me with the question of what exactly took place with Caldwell-Pope, whom we all expected to sign a much bigger deal, at least on an average annual value basis, than the one he actually signed.
The Athletic, prior to signing, we talked about it here on this show, had the projection being about $27 million a year, 27 plus, actually, about $27.6 million.
It wasn't even close to that.
And that's not what he ended up with. So now when you're talking about a $5 million difference, now, to be fair, and they had the opportunity to match it. They had the bird rights. But it does bring them into the second apron. It would bring them into the second apron for maybe as much as the next 3 seasons, which would allow them to re-sign Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., both players that they drafted. But it becomes very, very difficult to make maneuvers after that second apron. And there is an interesting discussion to be had about how much of that second apron teams are trying to get away from. Keep in mind that the Los Angeles Lakers did the same thing. LeBron James, for the first time in his career, less than the max, helping the Lakers get under the second apron. It also helped them give his son a much larger multiple-year contract than most second-rounders get. Perhaps that's beside the point. Only the Lakers know for sure. But there is a clear effort on the part of most teams to avoid that second apron because the limitations on improving your roster become so odious.
If it was just this year, I'd buy that. And in fact, have bought it here and stated so, as you have. You and I have been in agreement on this point. But if you really go back and look at Nugget history, especially over the last 3 years or so, have they really maxed out on the kind of team they could have had surrounding Nikola Jokic? Now, they have won a title. They have that going for them. And not all of the mistakes were made by executives as opposed to ownership. Some of the mistakes were ownership mistakes. Ownership has to sign off on contracts.
Right.
And whether to embrace certain players or let them go, that in the end is an ownership call. But if you think the executives here have truly been empowered, Tim Connelly, Calvin Booth, then mistakes have been made by both. Calvin Booth gave Zeke Naji an inexcusable contract worth $32 million over 4 years.
He is, by the way, now
it is untradeable.
The 5th highest paid player on the team. Zeke Naji, Jokic, Murray, Porter Jr., Gordon, Zeke Naji, even Šarić, a 30-year-old veteran, doesn't have a number that even comes all that close. Naji this year will make $8.9 million. Šarić, of course, $5.1. And then everybody, because of the necessity of drafting the players in which they've had, Christian Brown leads the way at just over $3 million. And so, yeah, Naji's deal, which still runs for 4 seasons, is untradeable unless you have a slew of picks you could send along with it. But everyone knows the Nuggets did that. 3 second-rounders went along with Reggie Jackson,
right?
Just to move up a couple spots.
They've done that before. But before I lose the thread here, it was mentioned by Calvin Booth himself fairly early on after Tim Connelly had left for the Minnesota Timberwolves that it was a mistake to have given a max deal to Michael Porter Jr. And I believe Calvin Booth was right then, and I think he's right now, even though Porter has developed into a better player during the last couple of years. And this past year, he played in all 82 regular season games, had a terrific first-round playoff series against the Lakers. Not so good in the second round. Certainly not the kind of work you'd expect from a max player. So that mistake is on Conley. The Naji mistake, obviously, was made by Booth. You go back as far as Jermichael Green, and I say as far as, that was just 2 years ago.
Right.
But they overpaid back in 2019, I believe, when Green was signed. They overpaid for him. He didn't give them nearly the value that the contract suggested that he would. That turns out to have been a mistake. And again, that came with Tim Connelly in charge, but also that's an ownership decision to go out and pay Jermichael Green that kind of money when he clearly is not that sort of player. They ended up having to kind of do a subtle salary dump by throwing in a first-round pick in a deal that, yes, did bring them the draft rights to Peyton Watson, but also involved multiple second-round picks being dealt away. And again, you didn't deal Jermichael Green for a first-rounder. You dealt him with a first-rounder, which happened to be a 2027 first-rounder that is protected. But still, there have been a series of these moves where the Nuggets have been strangely averse under any system to crossing any sort of threshold, be it now first apron, second apron, what the tax threshold was before. There's been an aversion to that when you'd think, because they've done it before years and years ago, for a few seasons, in fact, they were over the threshold or the cap, whatever you want to call it. That was during the time that Carmelo Anthony was here, that Chauncey Billups was here, and the Nuggets went to the conference finals one year and would have gone almost certainly in 2010 had George Karl not been stricken with a cancer diagnosis and sidelined during that period, thankfully later to return to the bench. But I think the Rockies felt that going over any kind of threshold was a mistake back then, and they are determined not to do it anymore. And at this point, now they're boxed in. Now they're boxed in to the extent that when they lose people like Caldwell Pope this year, all they can use to replace him is a $5 million a year player. And you'll notice with Šarić, it's a player option for the second year. The Reggie Jackson signing, now, again, with the benefit of hindsight, looks like a mistake because they ended up, when they dealt Reggie Jackson to dump that salary, again, they had to throw in three second-round draft picks just to make the move for, quote-unquote, cash considerations. There are so many things now that restrict them. This is about as much as they can do. I like the Holmes pick. I think Šarić will play about 15, 16, 17 minutes a game, do some of the same things he did for Golden State. That's fine. But I think now you're looking at a Nugget team as presently constituted that looks like 50, 52 win team. Now, that is not disqualifying because that's what Dallas was this past year, and the Mavs made it all the way to the finals. All that matters is getting hot at the right time, getting hot in the playoffs. But getting hot in the playoffs for the Nuggets is a lot more likely when you don't have to play Jokic every season more and more and more minutes when it should be fewer and fewer minutes.
And let's not forget, in the Game 7 loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves that ended their season, that the Nuggets were up in that game. They were up in that game in the second half.
By 20 points.
They simply ran out of gas as a unit, just completely ran out of gas, just watching it happen in real time. Now, Michael Malone has discussed after the season that he knows he has to be better at that, but there's a part of the organization that needs to run together. Booth needs to get him players that gives him the flexibility and the ability to trust that those players will do the right thing. And then ownership has to make sure you sign off on it and make sure that you're maximizing the Nuggets' ability to win as they stand right now without minimizing their ability to adjust on the fly over the next couple years. I don't think that the idea that they're not exceeding the second apron right now indicates that the Nuggets are being cheap, because Porter Jr., could have Aaron Gordon over the next couple of years. One of those two guys likely to have a new deal. Jamal Murray likely to have a new deal at some point before the season begins. They're going to get to that second apron, but they need to make sure they don't do it right now while they still try to build some sort of rotation off the bench that Michael Malone will use during the regular season and in the postseason. Because I agree with you. Right now, if you were to say the Nuggets as comprised, where will they be? I think you're about right, 50 to 52. I think they finished behind Oklahoma City. I think they finished behind Minnesota again. I think both of those teams are better. I don't know if the next teams are going to make a jump over the Nuggets. I still place them about 3 at the moment in regular season wins, and that's probably enough.
I think they're better than the Clippers. I think they're better than the Lakers, for example. I'm not sure about Dallas. I mean, the signing of Klay Thompson, I mean, that to me, if the Nuggets had somehow, and again, remember before we had our break last week,
there were topics.
I was saying
there was an idea
that the question with Thompson was not why they would be interested. Paul George was a why for me.
Right.
It was a how, and it turned out to be the right question, I think, because he goes ahead and signs with Dallas, much to the chagrin of his own father, a longtime Laker, Michael Thompson, who was hoping against hope that his son would choose the Lakers. His son did what was best for him, not necessarily from a financial point of view, but from the standpoint of being an ideal fit. Thompson to go with Kyrie and Doncic.
Shoot you out of the barn in those.
He doesn't have to be a star.
No.
He just has to be a good 3-point shooter and a conscientious defender. That's
it's interesting you bring that up. We'll talk about that in a minute, because the Denver Nuggets may be in pursuit of what would be the final piece of this year's puzzle. And while he has a remarkable resume, he is neither of those things. More on that in a minute. But I want to remind you, as it is summer, hey, let's talk some barbecue. If you've traveled all around the country, you've probably had a chance to try all different kinds. But my favorite around the Front Range is Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Over 10 years ago, Terry started with just a food truck, but he became so popular that now he has 4 locations serving up hardwood smoked meats with all the sides, made fresh daily. And a lot's changed in those 10 years, but Terry's commitment has not. It's to serve you and your family the best barbecue in town. They have 4 locations, easy to find. They're in Aurora, inside the Stanley Marketplace. That's the original of the restaurants. And if you're ever in the Stanley, there's lots of great places in there, but follow your nose, you'll end up at Rolling Smoke. In Golden, inside the Golden Mill, at the corner of Dry Creek and University and Centennial. That's the one that I frequent the most. Shout out to Hopper, the manager over there. And now the newest location open on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. And if you're headed to a show at Red Rocks, you can grab them there too. So skip the hot dogs, skip the weird snacks. Go and get yourself some good top quality barbecue. And then when you're back at home, you can find one of the 4 closest locations to you, and they're easy to find. Stop by and see Terry and the crew today, or grab it to go or catering order. Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Order online today at RollingSmokeBBQ.com. This sounds almost anathema for Nuggets fans, but the idea that Russell Westbrook might be the final piece of the Nuggets equation. He, much like Reggie Jackson, although this is an interesting point, opted into his player option with the Clippers. Russell Westbrook's player option was $4 million. Reggie Jackson's was $5 million. But that all of a sudden means the Clippers, who are after Paul George's decision, now they're just selling off. Things are going to just go apart for the Clippers. They'll start again in a few years, I guess. But it means that Westbrook may be available for the Nuggets. The word is Nikola Jokic has at least given his blessing, although he's not really a guy that's going to be telling the team what to do. Not really his style. Westbrook certainly brings an awful lot on the resume. We're talking about a former MVP, a 2-time scoring champ, the all-time leader in triple-doubles, of which Jokic is on that list as well. And Jokic has appreciated Westbrook's competitiveness, which he's seen in person and on the same side at all-star games. That part's not in dispute. The age of 35 is somewhat concerning, but the idea that he couldn't come off the bench, I think, was dispelled last year with the Clippers, in which he played a rather standard Russell Westbrook game. I think in the beggars can't be choosers department, Sandy, adding Russell Westbrook for $4 million a year is a great option, because at least you have a secondary ball handler, which you know he's going to make the right choices with the ball, and you know he's going to be aggressive. So you can get some scoring. The concern, last year he shot 27.3% behind the arc. He's never been a good 3-point shooter. And with the addition of Šarić, who, by the way, Šarić is a pretty good 3-point shooter. Last year, 46% from the field, but 37.6 from 3. But neither of these guys are known for their defense. As a matter of fact, they're known for being less than average defenders. And in the NBA, that's saying something. How much of a concern is that, even if you added Westbrook, that the defense would end up being problematic?
Major concern among many,
because opinion. Also you're talking about rookies behind it, right? And if Brown starts, Strother, not a lot of experience. I think we like Peyton Watson's defensive ability, and Drouin Holmes was defensive player of the year in his conference.
I'm not worried. I'm not saying he'll be lights out defensively. I'm not worried about his defense. Šarić a little bit. Westbrook, I'd be worried a lot, and he can't shoot. So any shot he takes, especially from 3-point range, is by definition a bad shot. If he's only making a little more than 1 out of every 4, it's just a poor percentage shot. And I grant you, he seemed to accept the idea of coming off the bench with the Clippers, and I assume he would with the Nuggets as well.
I think opting into a player option of $4 million tells me that he
Brown
knows.
is starting and getting more minutes. I don't know that sits well with Westbrook. I'll give you the foundational
as long as they're winning,
piece.
Presuming
there's
okay,
a willingness, but you get to the winning part, and I just don't know with Russell Westbrook. He's been on teams, many teams, in fact, who have been good enough to win and haven't won, and in fact have consistently underachieved. And I don't know that there's much difference in generally the career profile. Strengths and weaknesses might be a little different, but I look at James Harden kind of the same way I look at Russell Westbrook, except Westbrook's a little bit older. And 35-year-old guards don't do a lot for me generally. And honestly, I think it would be difficult to sustain a team concept with Russell Westbrook in your playing rotation. I think it would be difficult. I think there would be questions asked of him, not always fair questions, but questions nonetheless. And we know he has a short fuse. To me, this move would be subtraction by addition if they were to make it. And the guy they should have gone after, and there have been reports of a number of players the Nuggets thought about going after and couldn't get for whatever reason. So now they're left with this. And to me, Russell Westbrook, if you add up the pros on one side of the ledger and cons on the other side of the ledger, the cons outweigh the pros.
Even at the $4 million for 1 year. I mean, it's hard to imagine what else you can get in free agency or in the trade market at $4 million a year. You're not going to get a really promising young player because you don't have anything really to trade. This is just one of the opportunities the Clippers are breaking things up, and the Nuggets would find a way to get in there. Now the question is, how do you do it? And the Zeke Naji contract becomes part of that sort of formula as well for the Nuggets, because they still have a little bit they have to do there. But even at the $4 million, I guess I look at it slightly differently. I don't disagree with anything you said. Never been a good defender. 35, probably not going to get any better. It's going to get worse. Just foot speed, father time, the way it goes. The shot's not going to get any better. I do get that. But you are talking about a guy that has been a elite Hall of Fame caliber player. And even though he is at the tail end, presumably he's also a guy that would really like to get himself a ring. He wasn't Kevin Durant. He didn't get to hop to the Golden State Warriors and scoop one up. He's been chasing it. 4 teams in the last 5 years. Now, none of those teams got notably better with him on that, and that's a concern too. But if you're the Nuggets and you are desperate, and I mean desperate, which they are, for a ball handler behind Jamal Murray who needs big minutes taken away from him, I would argue that you could still do a lot worse, but there are risks. Could it blow up in your face? It could. But I think the Nuggets are at a point where, do you want to prop that window open this year or not? And if they are, it might be the best option available to them.
It smacks more to me of panic, of desperation than it does.
I don't get the impression it was part of the plan at all.
Of team building. Well, that's the problem. It was, I think he's just
sort of
matter
kind of landing in their lap.
What, 6 weeks ago? A little more? 7 weeks? That the Nuggets seem to have a plan, and they seem to be following through on that plan. The only team in the NBA, I guess we'd say in the Western Conference, that was ever going to give Boston any difficulty in the playoff was Denver. That was the only team that was ever going to give Boston. I think
Minnesota might have given them some trouble, but
I don't know. Minnesota showed that it's not quite ready for the big stage.
I think that's
Dallas. Fair. I mean, what did Dallas have going into that series? Not home court advantage.
No.
Although that didn't seem to matter for Dallas until it did matter in the NBA Finals. And they were just overmatched. They could have played every game in Dallas and lost that series. My point being that only one team in the league looked like it had the talent and the sort of plan in place, though they had made a few errors. And now, 7 weeks later, they're saying, well, they're making moves like Šarić wasn't part of the plan. Bringing in Westbrook if they choose to do so. I'm not sure they will, but if they choose to do so, that, as you have acknowledged, certainly not part of the plan.
No.
Now, there doesn't seem to be a plan. There seems to be a Calvin Booth vision and a Michael Malone vision that aren't even close to running concurrently.
Well, they have very different jobs, right?
Starting with their contracts. Well, yeah, I understand that. And I watched Craig Breslow on Sunday Night Baseball last night, the general manager of the Boston Red Sox, openly acknowledge. And the Red Sox are in an interesting position, too, with a clearly great manager who it's equally clear is not coming back to manage the Boston Red Sox next year. And Breslow never gave any indication that anything was afoot to bring Alex Cora back. My point in bringing this up is that Breslow said, of course, in sports, my job is to think 3 months from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 years from now. And the players and the manager have a job to do. And he's saying this before the game with the Yankees last night. That's to win tonight's ball game.
Right.
And stay in the wild card spot that they currently occupy, which is the last of the 3 wild card spots in the American League. But he openly acknowledged different jobs. And I listened to that and I said, there's no way that Alex Cora is coming back next year. I think there's some other factors involved, mainly Craig Counsell, who signed a 5-year, $40 million contract, while Alex Cora is sitting there 49-40 with a team that shouldn't even have 40 wins at this point by all reasonable accounts and all the injuries they've had. And he's making 2.75. You think Alex Cora looks at Craig Counsell over in the National League managing a last place team, the Chicago Cubs, and thinks he isn't worth even 3/8 what Craig Counsell is worth?
Well, Michael Malone is new contract, one of the highest paid
here
coaches
it's
in
a
the
little
league.
different. His contract runs longer than Booth.
Right.
And everybody in Boston is saying and writing, hey, Alex Cora is the manager of the year, not just in the American League either. If there were an award for all of baseball, I understand there are 2, one for each league. But if there were for all of baseball, he's the manager of the year in Major League Baseball. There's no team that's overachieving more than Boston, doing more than young talent. Certainly not this crowd here on 20th and Blake. They're not doing a better job. What I'm saying is that everyone in Boston wants Cora extended. There isn't nearly as much enthusiasm as far as extending Calvin Booth is concerned. And in my opinion, if Calvin Booth is not signed to an extension before next season begins, he will be a lame duck general manager of the Denver Nuggets and will be allowed to leave at the end of the season, and it won't be termed a firing because his contract's up.
Right.
The same way the Broncos once disposed of Dan Reeves. They simply said, we're not firing him. His contract's up, and we made a choice not to renew it.
That's the kind of thing that maybe concerns me more than the current spending, than the apron, than anything like that. Is what is the goal? And you got the impression at the postmortem for the season that Malone and Booth might have been on the same page. Malone more understanding. I get it that I have to play these younger guys more. I can't just settle on the big guys. He understands he has to get them more rest. Booth trying to make it clear, of course, that given the reality of the salary cap and the apron structure, he's trying to get experienced draftees, guys that had multiple years. And we talked about Shaw there last year, and Pickett and Tyson, now getting Holmes, trying to get guys who at least can step in and have that learning curve somewhat flattened, hopefully leading to Malone being able to trust them. But you're right, that their jobs are so different that at a certain stage, they become, to an extent, at cross purposes. Michael Malone wants to do everything to win this game. Calvin Booth has to say in his job, well, this game isn't important to me as the next year, 2 years, 3 years. So if the Nuggets don't get these guys at least on the same page, you're right. You have sort of a bad feeling. And it was a different situation where you lose George Karl and Masai Ujiri in the same year. And for the Nuggets and for fans to believe that this opportunity to continue to compete for a title is going to continue over the next couple of years, you can't have that looming overhead. You can't. And even if that means that much as they're going for the next couple of years, this is clearly the plan. Young, experienced players backing up the stars that you have. Maybe they need to do the same thing with Booth. Malone's contract runs to the 2026-2027 season. I don't think that's too far to extend Calvin Booth if you believe in the vision.
But there's one vision and then there's another one. And maybe it isn't as wide a chasm as we both imagined it to be at times. Mm-hmm. But there's still a clear difference on one point anyway. One of those two thinks clearly that Christian Braun is ready to start next year. He's right on track to be a starter. And Michael Malone publicly, politely disagreed with that.
I pointed out that if you're going to play shooting guard,
press conference, he's got to shoot better. He's got to shoot
and that
better.
is a fair criticism of Christian Brown at this stage of his
they
development.
won't mind playing Russell Westbrook, who can't shoot a lick
Right.
and isn't nearly as good a shooter as Christian Brown, is far more limited as a player, isn't half the defensive player, isn't a quarter of the defensive player Christian Brown is. So I'm saying you bring Russell Westbrook in. This is one of the problems that opens up. Russell Westbrook has to play 25 minutes a game, 20 to 25 minutes a game. What's that going to do with Christian Brown's minutes? Forget about Strother. Forget about Pickett. You might as well let Pickett go. If you bring in Westbrook, you might as well. The same thing they did
part of the trade
then you did it with Colin Gillespie. Just let him go. Let him go to Phoenix. You know what? He'll play in Phoenix. He'll play. Not 25 minutes a game, but he'll play in Phoenix. He'll play 15 minutes a game for Phoenix. And so I don't think you can have two powerful personalities who so clearly disagree on some fundamental issues.
The Nuggets are stuck
that's the way Malone operates. Malone's never been a developer of young players. No. Does anybody really think that Nikola Jokic in some other setting wouldn't have developed into the magnificent player? Of course he would have.
The talent would have.
That would have shown through playing for any coach. And this is not a knock at Malone, who did a very good coaching job during their championship season. But, I think he got a little full of himself, maybe got a little ahead of his skis, so to speak, in believing that the Nuggets had a dynasty going. Who was it over the weekend that said dynasties are dead in the NBA? Golden State was the last one. There'll never be another one. That person will be Steph Curry. I would trust Steph Curry's judgment on that point more than I trust Michael Malone's judgment on that point.
Well, the Avalanche, of course, are trying to work their way back. The Nuggets are roommates over at Ball Arena. They have made a lot of moves in free agency, keeping some of their core restricted free agents as well as their own free agents. They've also added a lot. Have they done enough? We'll take a look at it and get you an idea of where the Avs stand today, with the season still quite a few months away, but things are starting to crystallize for the Avs. We'll let you know about that right after our message from our friends at Zaner Hardin Law.
We plan for good things. We plan for things we look forward to doing, but we don't plan for unpleasant things. We don't plan for disasters. We don't plan for car accidents. But if you've been in one and you've been injured in one, you know you need the best attorneys possible, and we have them here in Zaner Hardin Law. Kurt Zaner and Mark Hardin are the types of lawyers you want handling your case. They're two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado and across the country. They've won nearly every award: Trial Lawyer of the Year, $1 Million Advocates, Super Lawyers, and the top 100 national trial lawyers. They've appeared in the Denver Post, local news channels, even Good Morning America. These guys handle the most important cases because they want to keep this community among the safest places to live in America. Multi-million-dollar verdicts coming down, the respect of every insurance company in the region. You're lucky to have these guys in our own backyard. If you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zaner Hardin today at yourstorywillbetold.com. That's yourstorywillbetold.com.
Well, the Colorado Avalanche have spent the offseason a little more aggressively than the Denver Nuggets have. They had a little more money to play with, but things are, of course, still complicated with Gabriel Landeskog, Valeri Nichushkin's situation, but nothing was going to change there. Nothing's going to change there in the short term either. So what the Avalanche have done, they got aggressive. They brought Jonathan Drouin back and Casey Middlestat back. Casey Middlestat gets 3 years, $5.75 million per. Seems like a pretty fair deal on both sides. If you're Middlestat, you seem to be on the rise. Maybe you don't want that really long contract just yet. You'll be a free agent again at the age of 28. Might be right in your prime. It allows the Avalanche to continue to see with Middlestat and Colton, although it looks as if Middlestat immediately got ahead of Colton at the center rates and continued along.
Oh, he's the second center.
1, 2, and 3. Yeah, Colton is the thought when they got Colton is he might improve over the next couple of years at that level, but I think the Avs have that.
Well, that may happen. He's still a third line center.
Right. Right. And so
On a
now you're
contending
square
team.
down the middle. Jonathan Drouin comes by, another 1 year, $2.5 million. That is definitely a hometown discount, although Denver is certainly not Drouin's hometown, but maybe home is where Nathan McKinnon is, the best player in the league and the guy you played with as you were a teenager. So they get Drouin and Middlestat back. That's big. Just starting there, I guess, the Middlestat deal, to me, it seems fair for both sides. Middlestat doesn't give away too much of his future, especially thinking of who he'll be playing with the next couple of years. It's a smart move. And the Avs don't get away with a bargain, but given his talent, given where he was drafted, given all the thoughts, I think that ends up being fair. And the Drouin deal, just a steal for the Avs.
Well, we were talking about Russell Westbrook a few minutes ago. And to me, the polar opposite of Russell Westbrook is Jonathan Drouin in the following respect. What did Westbrook make last year? $4 million.
Yeah, well, at least it's, and player option for $4 million this year.
Right. Okay.
And he opted in.
He opted in.
So he agreed.
We agreed.
$4 million.
$4 million is fine. Jonathan Drouin made well under $1 million last year on a 1-year deal. Had a terrific year. Probably had he not been hurt late in the year. It was very late in the year, but maybe he gets near 60 points. And we said 50 to 55 would be great. He got 56. Before the season began, we said it'd be a steal. It'd be certainly a bargain. Bottom line, bargain. With 50 to 55 points. Credit to him, credit to his agent, credit to the Avalanche for doing a kind of mini bridge deal. I know it's only for 1 year, so it's a pretty short bridge. But $2.5 million, not 4, not 4.5, not 4.7.
For a guy that will turn 30 before the end of next
And
season.
I was reading those figures bandied about that somebody would offer him something like that. I don't know if that happened or not. But if you notice, one of the quotes, I believe from Chris McFarland, the general manager, was that Jonathan understood the value of this team to him as much as he understood, maybe more than he understood, his value to the team. In other words, he loved playing with Nathan McKinnon and got to play with him a lot. So you talk about the very embodiment of the hometown discount for those of you watching, listening, who are a little unclear as to what a hometown discount is. It's what Jonathan Drouin signed for.
It's knowing that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and understanding that for the amount of money that you're talking about, maybe it's better to be in a spot where your career is going to be better nurtured. Obviously, we saw that a guy who's nearly out of the league, gets his career restarted and give credit to the McKinnon Rantanen line that he played on a lot. Give credit to the Avalanche. Give credit to Jared Bednar. Give credit to all those people. They deserve it. But mostly give credit to Jonathan Drouin, who came in and continued to put in the work and was either on the second line or on the first line, did what he needed to do, got better as the season came along over and over and over again, to the point where I think the Avalanche look at their top line and say that until and unless Gabe Landeskog comes back, we're good. McKinnon is centering Drouin and Rantanen. That's our top line. We're done. That's set up. And maybe he could have gotten money somewhere else, but he's not a top liner on anywhere else in the league right now, because after his career sort of fell off, the 1 year situation with McKinnon playing next to the MVP for a lot of it, I think a lot of teams would look at that and say, we're interested, but we're not interested in a really long-term deal. Not yet. We'd like to see you do it again, especially that you're 29. And given that, if there wasn't going to be that much difference in the money, why not be on the top line with 2 of the top 10 players in the league, including the reigning MVP? It's a no-brainer, and it's a win for both sides. McKinnon seemed a little bit lighter this year playing next to his old friend.
I agree with all of that. I still say they didn't even triple his salary.
No,
they didn't even triple it. And I was sure they'd have to quadruple it. Minimum have to quadruple. I was looking at $4 million. Whether it's 1 year deal, 2 year deal for 8, 3 year deal for 12, whatever. He's still in his 20s.
Right. And if he puts up 50, 60 points again, then the Avalanche will need to pay, or someone else will.
Yes, true. But the Avalanche bought themselves what they needed, some time.
Yes.
And they also kept their salary situation under control, because to me, at 1 year and $2.5 million for a guy who's 55 to 60 points, especially playing with McKinnon for most, if not all of the season, that's a bargain. You saved $1.5 million to $2 million a year on that deal alone.
And even if he falls off,
you didn't overspend for Middlestat.
Right.
And, by the way, I know we'll get into this more later in the week. I thought under the circumstances, the Avs had a pretty good draft. They got the best goaltender in the draft.
I love trading
38th
down.
pick.
Loved that move. That's a smart play. Yeah, I mean, you go ahead and you get the goaltender that you need to restock your organization.
And this guy is, if not the top, then one of the top European goaltenders.
Right.
And he's not 18 or 19 either. He's 21 years old. So he's relatively seasoned. He's played against top competition. And the Zellers kid they got in the third round is going to be a 3-year college player. And I imagine a very good prospect, the left winger they got in the third round. And I like 2 or 3 of their other picks too along the way as guys who could conceivably be Major League Hockey players, serviceable players. I thought under the circumstances, what was it? 9 picks?
Mm-hmm.
9 picks they ended up with. I think they did very well for themselves there. And in terms of free agency, listen, I'm not really excited about the moves they made on defense, but they certainly added more bodies. They sacrificed some quality for quantity.
Yeah, I think there's some value of that. But the main name they bring in that's familiar to fans would be Calvin DeHaan, who's 33,
Yes.
Played in the league for a while. DeHaan
Has played on some good teams.
Yeah, and played on good teams. I mean, I look at DeHaan as being a third pair guy,
Yeah.
which is where he was on the Lightning. And
Yeah.
okay, you're not going to complain about that. I don't think it's special. I think he brings you a Jack Johnson type of.
And they could not afford
play.
Shawn Walker.
No, and they couldn't. And I liked the addition of Eric Brandstrom, who has one of the guys that the Vegas Golden Knights picked very early in their their first draft. They picked
Right.
Brandstrom, and he hasn't been a disaster by any stretch, but he hasn't turned into what they thought. He got traded to Ottawa. Now we understand, like, Ottawa's been a team in some flux, but they get Brandstrom on a relatively cheap deal, and he reminds me a little bit. There's not the personal connections, but it's a bit of the Drouin gamble. Yep. A guy with a lot of a high-end talent, or quite frankly, all the other things notwithstanding, the Nichushkin gamble when they originally made it. A guy that was the 10th overall pick.
How much of a gamble that was.
And that was a gamble when they picked him off the Stars
for a full season when they picked him up.
So the Avs have, at least in recent history, Nichushkin's off-ice issues notwithstanding, have done a pretty good job of picking up players that had a little bit left in the tank.
And we thought they had to do that at least once during this offseason.
And they missed on Ryan Johansson. They missed there. But for the most part, they've been pretty good. And in Brandstrom's case, you're talking about a guy that doesn't make $1 million, is still very young. I liked it. You still have Sam Malinsky back there, and I don't think they should rush him, but you even have Sean Behrens potentially in the mix.
You know what? Having watched Sean Behrens at Denver a lot this past year, he was a much better player this past year than he had been the previous year.
And I don't think
he was a good player the previous year. But I thought he was, not just during the season in conference play, but I thought he was in the tournament as good a defensive defenseman as there was in the country. And yes, the story of the tournament was the brilliant goaltending. There's a little reason to question that the MVP for the Pioneers was Matty Davis, and Sean Behrens would acknowledge that. So would Zeev Buium, who was picked 12th overall in the draft by the Minnesota Wild. Very good pick for Minnesota, I think. And we'll be able to see Buium play quite a bit against the Avalanche, unfortunately, rather than for them. But Sean Behrens, I think, can play. And I didn't think, and who am I to make the judgment, but I've watched a lot of college hockey, and I think I have a sense for who among the good college players, great college players, can make that transition to the NHL. With the way he plays and the way he's improved, I think Behrens can be a second or third tandem defenseman. as a defensive defenseman. He won't be all that productive as a goal scorer, point producer, but I think there is a place for him in the not too distant future with the Colorado Avalanche.
And then the nice thing is you don't have to rush it. If it turns out that he's not quite ready to go, I think that a pairing of Malinsky and DeHaan will work perfectly well on the third line. And then you have the opportunity for some of the talent to bubble up. The other player that intriguing to watch, smaller guy, only 26 years old, 5'9", 183, a wing. Yuri Anala of the Swedish league, playing out there for Frölund and leads the Swedish league in goals. Despite the fact his team didn't make the playoffs, and in the Swedish league, your playoff goals count still as the total. Leads the league in goals, decides to make a leap, trying to make it to the NHL. The Avs took a flyer on him. They're bringing him over. That's another idea. You get the 1-year entry-level deal with Inala, and you bring in more goal scoring. So I think the Avs are doing, not what the Nuggets are doing so much and gambling on a lot of young guys, but they have a blend here where they have some veteran players they brought back. They brought in an interesting mix. I really like what they've done. I don't look at it and say they're for the Stanley Cup. I don't think they are. But I thought, quite frankly, that there would be a bigger drop-off, at least on paper. When I look at the rosters, I see it today. I look at it and thinking, okay, this isn't as bad as it could have been. In fact, it might not be all that different, especially if a couple play. You have a full year Middlestat, a full year of a more comfortable Drouin. No, you don't have Landeskog, but you didn't last year. No, you don't have Nichushkin, and that definitely does hurt. But you should have Logan O'Connor back. I like what the Avs have done. We'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about them with Arif Dean from Mile High Sports a little bit later in the week. But we will turn our attention to the Denver Broncos, who are just about, by the way, about a week and a half from reporting for training camp. It comes up that quick. And apropos of nothing there, online sports betting, if you haven't jumped into that world, I know it can be complicated. For 4 years, you've heard all the ads, you've seen them, you've been overwhelmed by them. You can probably even remember some of them in your sleep. So we're going to add one more to the pile, but this one's actually there to help you. So Mile High Sports has gathered all of the best signups and bonuses and offers and put them all on one page on our website because we wanted to make it easy for folks interested in betting to find the best options. So we research them all and we bring them together in a way that makes it simple for you to know what's available and what's best for you, because not every offer might be the best offer for you. So whether it's bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of them are all in one place. So you visit milehighsports.com today, or you can download our free mobile app and then click on Colorado Sports Betting. It's that simple. All of it will be right there for you, all organized by book, all organized by the offers, so you can jump into that world and have fun the way you want to have fun, not just by the way that whichever commercial ran. It's that simple. Think of it as your bonus from your friends right here at Mile High Sports. For the Denver Broncos, Sandy, we've talked about this in the last couple of weeks. The folks at ESPN, when they were looking over all of the rosters, we broke it down for you. 31 out of 32. That's where they placed the Broncos. Pro Football Focus, a couple days before that, 30 out of 32. The Giants, generally considered worse. Congratulations, I guess, Broncos. And then...
Is that why the Giants are featured on off-season Hard Knocks?
Who knows? Also, they're just the Giants.
I can't say I saw the first episode in its entirety, but I saw parts of it, and bad situation.
I'm not a Hard Knocks guy. I got to admit it.
Increasingly, I am not either.
And I have every single year when Hard Knocks,
they're playing to the cameras now.
Yeah, and they've been doing that for a while, and that's why for now a long time when fans think about the offseason, is this the year the Broncos are on Hard Knocks? I keep hoping. I'm like, no, please, not this year. Like, never get on.
Although Sean Payton said it would reveal his.
I'm sure he was pitching
inner comedian.
Yeah, he was trying to get on it, and so I think that probably next year the Broncos' turn might finally come up.
We know Sean Payton makes all those decisions.
Well, for the Broncos, we'll see how much Roger Goodell and Sean Payton like each other. I guess if they want to feature Sean Payton's inner comedian, but.
He says it'll be funny.
This is one of those situations where I think when you look at Hard Knocks, you're right. There's a lot of playing for the cameras, and maybe that's okay for teams that are good and at the cusp. But I think of teams that are rebuilding and don't have a clear pecking order when it comes to the roster, it's a problem. And I think you'll see it with the Giants, and I think you would have seen it with the Broncos, because the Broncos roster, this is the issue, right? Who's in charge here? And I guess I would ask this first. When you talk about what's lacking on the Broncos roster. What's worse, depth or top end talent?
Yes.
that good.
I would say there are teams, quite a few of them, that aren't very deep. There aren't nearly as many teams that lack quality stars, playmakers, game changers, game breakers. There's a difference between someone who changes games and someone who is a star. Patrick Surtain is a star, and for reasons, some of which he has no control over, he's not a game changer.
Okay.
And Justin Simmons was, and they don't have Justin Simmons anymore. And at this point, nobody else has Justin Simmons either, but I suspect.
And is it okay to oversimplify and say game changer at this point, especially on defense, is someone who can force a turnover?
Yes.
Whether that's with a strip sack or a hurry or a pick.
And you can be a star as a technician. And I don't think there's a better technician at the cornerback spot than Patrick Surtain.
And his own.
But technicians give up. They don't give up big plays. They don't change games
negatively.
Right. But they also get passes caught on them in key situations. And yes, the difference would be someone who takes chances, goes for the big play, goes for the interception, and misses and gives up the big play. And if you had other difference makers on this defense, you'd want the best technician in the game at least one of the cornerback spots. But at the other cornerback spot, you need somebody, one, who can stand up to the pressure of getting thrown at quite a bit, because Surtain's not going to get thrown at a lot, maybe a little more than some people think, but not a lot. I certainly would agree with that. But they don't have that person, at least not now. They don't have a game changer on the defensive line. They don't have a game changer among the linebackers, edge rushers, off-ball linebackers.
And there's a lot of
and I think there's
even
on the part of people around the Broncos, and tend sometimes to lose sight of the forest for the trees, acknowledge that the secondary, safety in particular, might be the weakest spot on this team right now, not just on defense, but on the entire team, because you've got one guy in Brandon Jones, whom they signed as a free agent, who's never really gotten through a full season.
Right.
And then you have Caden Stearns, who hasn't even been able to start some seasons because of injury. So I look at this as more, to answer your question, long-winded way of getting back to the question you asked, I'd say the lack of quality is more important than the absence of depth here and there. I mean, they've got bodies.
Yeah,
I just don't know that they have game breakers.
And I look at that edge rushing core is the perfect example, right? They
have bodies.
You have Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito and Baron Browning, and now they added Jonah Ellis, who we both like. Okay, that's four players who would make the vast majority, if not really who would make every NFL roster. They'd probably make virtually every NFL roster. So depth-wise, that's all right. But which one of them is going to step up and be a double-digit sack guy? Which one is going to be able to get a strip sack here and there and cause the ball to be turned over? I mean, which one of them is going to do that? And I think even the Broncos would probably fairly look at that group, especially the top three, Bonito, Browning, and Cooper. And if they were being completely honest with you, would probably just say, well, we hope one of them. I think they hope it's Browning. I think they believe the most in Browning, but I think they also look at Cooper and Bonito and say, are these guys that much worse? Not really. They're just hoping that one of these guys will bubble up. And on the offense, it's really the same side. Unfortunately, Javonte Williams' disastrous knee injury really limited him. But you have now a handful of running backs that are interesting. You hope one of them bubbles up. Behind Cortland Sutton, who is definitely not a game-breaking guy, but a player who produces. Is it Troy Franklin, the rookie, does Josh Reynolds have some more headroom to grow? Are they really going to work Marvin Mims? I don't know. But again, same thing. They're hoping someone will bubble up. At the tight end position, you're hearing all the talk being about Lucas Kroll. That's the definition of we hope something bubbles up. It's fascinating, especially when you look at the idea for game breakers on this team. And the one guy that maybe has the best chance is actually Bo Nix. Because he has produced at that level. He is going to have the opportunity. He does. We have seen the other two guys around him that he might actually be your game breaker, despite the fact that out of all the quarterbacks that were picked, he was the one that nobody seemed to want. But it's a combination of Nix, his coach, and the fact the rest of the roster has a whole bunch of, well, we hope somebody will stand out, but we don't even really know who that might be. And in many ways, that's this year's version of the Denver Broncos.
Have you noticed, too, that when it comes to the quarterback sweepstakes, people slowly but surely are coming around?
It's too slow, but
to the guy
slowly. Who it always belonged to,
who was always going to be the starter, barring
I'm looking on social media right now as we record this, and one of the big things that, in another place is Nix the starting QB?
Yes, that's the question.
Hate to cut the knees out from under them, but yes, and was the day he was drafted. Actually, about the month before he was drafted,
yes, when they decided
started telling you that all of the stuff with J.J. McCarthy and everything was nonsense. Yeah, stop it. Just get ahead of it. It's Nix. And so when you have a rookie quarterback who many teams, and who knows, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, a whole bunch of teams passed on Dan Marino. Whoops. But with the presumption that Nix might not even be your standard first-round capable quarterback, for that guy to have probably the most room to grow and the most realistic path to improvement on your entire offense, that's scary because who's he supposed to get the ball to?
The question with Bo Nix, and I don't think we'll get an answer this year definitively on this. We'll get an answer some point years 2, 3, 4. And the answer will have something to do with his ability, a lot to do with his ability to lift other players. And I don't know that we'll see that this year. I think he'll be good. I think he'll be fine. But I don't think he will be someone who lifts other players to a different level. I think Courtland Sutton is a fascinating case study when you talk about pretty good receiver, average by number one standards, probably below average by number one receiver standards, number two receiver on a team, which he wouldn't be here, assuming he is not traded. Number two, okay, probably live with him as a number two receiver in a lot of places, certainly as a number three, even on good teams, championship contenders, because he is athletic, he's big, and he showed signs last year, 10 touchdown receptions, something he hadn't demonstrated before, but last year demonstrated that in the clutch, he can make big plays. Touchdowns are always big plays.
Right.
And he had 10 touchdown receptions.
Only 5
on a
receivers had
team
more.
On which no one else had 5.
Yeah.
Touchdown receptions.
Yeah, the next closest was 3. And that was
no one had 4.
That was Brandon Johnson.
He had 10. Can he help Nix? Can Nix lift Sutton and others to heights previously not achieved? I don't think it's fair to expect him to do it in year one, but there have to be some signs, I think, throughout the season that he is capable of doing it in the not too distant future. And I think that's the big question about the Broncos in 2024 and will remain the big question.
For the Broncos, obviously, in just a little about a week and a half here that you'll be talking about them at training camp, and the rubber will really hit the road. But yeah, the Broncos need that training camp in this preseason more than they need many of them, in part because, yeah, they have to find out who will step up. This is one of those teams where there is some talent there, but what does it look like? What will it look like when they all get going? We don't know. And it's fascinating to see. It will be really intriguing to look at this team, especially given the AFC West around it. But the Chargers need to be resurgent under Jim Harbaugh. We know that the Chiefs are not going anywhere. How much better will the Raiders be? Will they still be in the mix? Can Denver actually beat them? Because now the streak is with the Raiders, not even with the Chiefs anymore. But it feels like one of those years, and we've talked about it, that it may take a step backwards to go 2 steps forward. And we'll see how that assembles as the training camp rolls along. But it's going to come quick, and they're going to need to be good in a hurry when you're talking about remaining tight. So we'll find out. But also coming up, even sooner than that, matter of fact, by the way, this Saturday is the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds on this Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors will be on site, including more than 50 whiskey vendors. That festival takes place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., features live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter. The tickets are available online, assuming you're 21 and over, of course. And if you use promo code MHS, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. More than 50 whiskey vendors on site. If you're 21 and up, get those tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. Better get moving because it's on Saturday. And remember to use promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets. That's the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds this Saturday, July 13th. Now, expect to get more if you have been missing your Coach Prime your little vibe there. It's coming because starting tomorrow down at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, the football media days arrive for the Big 12.
And he'll be there this year.
Absolutely. So now you'll be talking about
he wasn't at the Pac-12 session last year because of his foot issue
with the surgeries, right? This time he will speak. He will be the first person to speak on Wednesday, 11 a.m. We'll get a little bit more from the coach then. But obviously they are now back in the Big 12. And the idea, when you look at the Big 12, a little bit different. No Oklahoma, no Texas, Cincinnati's in there, West Virginia's in there, Central Florida's in there, BYU is in there. I mean, it is a totally different world. And it is all spread across the country as all the big super conferences are now. But looking at the way the Pac-12 finished in its final season with nearly the national championship coming out of it, had Washington been able to play a little bit better, and Washington and Oregon being in a semifinal matchup, 2 of the final 4 teams. The explosive Pac-12 offenses held through all the way to the end. Was that a better football conference than this Big 12 is now that Oklahoma and Texas are out?
Big 12 is not what the Big 12 or the Big 8 used to be.
No.
Smash mouth football, Russian football, wishbone football. I don't know how far you want to go back. Nothing like that anymore. Big 12 stylistically really isn't all that much different from what the Pac-12 was last year, just not as good.
Yeah.
It's just not as
and
good.
I look at it too. I mean, you're talking about the preseason.
They don't have the
favorite
quarterbacks.
Is Utah, of course, as it should be. But then it's K-State, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Arizona, Iowa State.
How about that?
West Virginia.
No, I think Kansas is a fairly remarkable college football story.
And they got 5 first-place votes in the preseason Big 12 poll.
But
there's no juggernaut here.
I love Kansas. My son went there. I root for them to this day more heartily for the basketball team than the football team in most years. But still,
most
KU
alums do, quite frankly. Yeah,
I admire what they've done as a football program, and no matter what the makeup of the conference, to have envisioned 5 years ago that Kansas would have been a preseason top 5 conference pick. Unimaginable. But it is a sign of the weakness, relatively speaking, the weakness of the Big 12 that Kansas is considered as the 4th.
Do you know who's 5th?
Program.
Arizona. They're just okay. I mean, at least in football this year, I look at it and I'm just sort of struck by how unimpressive it is. At least when you're talking about teams that are going to be top 25 regulars, you look at it and I'm like, Utah, okay. Everybody else, I could see a scenario where none of the other teams finish in the top 25. across the country. I mean, I just think it right now, as it reloads, it's a bit of a soft football conference. And I think that makes it, at least bringing it back to Deion Sanders in Colorado, it makes it all the more imperative that you have to get to a bowl this year. You have to win 6. You have to get to a bowl. The conference itself is much softer than what you faced last year in the Pac-12 by any measurement. And I think that increases not only the visibility, but increases the pressure. You know, we know that the Big 12 has a heavy Texas component, even though the university is no longer in it. That's where Deion Sanders still makes his regular home. That's his stomping grounds. It doesn't feel like make or break for the Buffaloes because, let's face it, 2 years ago, they were a 1-win team. But it does feel as if this is going to continue its momentum forward for CU and not hit a brick wall. They have to make a bowl game. And, Sandy, they might need to do it without having this crazy fat non-conference schedule. Start out 4-2 or whatever, and then finish with 6. They need to probably win a little bit in every month to get to that 6. They need to look like a team that is on track to being a competitor in this conference.
Unlike the team they were last year.
Right.
That started 3-0 and finished with 4 wins.
Right. So
it's
got to be better.
8 of their last 9. And the only person around here in any walk of life who saw that coming and said so for public consumption was our man, Dr. Rick Perea. And it was, he said when they were 3-0, they're going to lose 8 of their last 9. I'm telling you, they'll find a way to get one. He didn't specify which one it would be. I imagine he thought it might be Stanford homecoming, and that turned out to be the worst loss of the year and one of the worst losses in the history of the program. I want to be as fair as I can in saying this. Last year, to me, was a major disappointment. And it brought to mind what Rick Neuheisel said once upon a time in a different context, right after he left Colorado. He said, Colorado has all the things that money can't buy. Colorado brought in a lot more money, a lot more revenue with Deion Sanders as the head coach last year. The community of Boulder benefited quite clearly. The national exposure for Boulder, for the program, unmatched. No one, regardless of record, had more exposure last year than CU. No one was covered more favorably than the University of Colorado.
At least in the first 2/3 of the year.
First 2/3 of the year, I would agree completely. Even when they started to lose, it was only after the Stanford debacle that people started to substantively question some of the things that were going on. And I am generalizing here.
Yeah.
There were people who weren't on board as heartily at the beginning, even after the 3-0 start, because the third win was a little bit fortunate.
Yep.
They were more lucky than good in getting past Colorado State. This year, the schedule is a little more challenging in the sense that instead of 2 out of the first 3 at home, they get 2 out of the first 3 on the road. And you're right. They need to come out of September with multiple wins. They need to keep things on track in October and November. They don't have to be great. They don't have to win 8 or more games. But they have to win 6 because all the bells and whistles, people have seen that now. All the bells and whistles they could trot out last year. Deion Sanders is a very good speaker. He is captivating, at times compelling, but I can't imagine that the bag of tricks is bottomless. And at some point, you have to win, and especially in this conference. I think they got a break that the Pac-12 turned out last year to have 2 of the top 4 teams in the country.
Yeah, I agree.
They got a break. They got a break that way.
It looks more favorable
made
by comparison.
the record look, well, a little more excusable. And some of the teams, not so much Stanford, but some of the teams they lost to actually were pretty good teams that either started slowly or were beset. I'm thinking of Utah by injury. And
right.
CU looked pretty good in that game,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, they're playing a third-string quarterback too.
Right.
Utah didn't have it started, didn't even have its second-string quarterback for that game. This year, I think there will be more of an expectation aligned with winning, and it's important that they get to a stage where they're being judged not on showmanship, not as show horses, but as workhorses who improve during the season. They don't decline. Last year, they clearly got worse and worse and worse for the most part, week to week. And this year, it's got to go exactly in the opposite direction, even if they don't start in a blaze of glory as they did last year.
Well, the eyes are going to be on them because the first 3 games of the season, North Dakota State, which will be in Folsom, that's
tough team.
That's a Thursday game for national television. The Saturday game against Nebraska, in Nebraska this time, national television already set. The Saturday after that, the evening game against the Colorado State Rams, the most watched nighttime game in the history of ESPN college football last year. That will be national again. Not only will the first 3 games be nationally televised, but only 2 of their first 5 games on the whole will even be at home. And that's North Dakota State to start the season, and then Baylor. And as a result, getting off to a fast start is going to be really critical because if they don't, the questions, because of the way you finish, the 8 out of 9 finish, if it starts in a 1-3 start, let's say, with maybe only the win over either the Rams or the Bison at North Dakota State, the questions will start becoming hot and heavy even before the halfway point of the season, even before the conference schedule really kicks in full. And that will be an extraordinarily complicated situation for the Buffs. So they have to get off to a quick start. And the turnover in the coaching staff, the turnover on the roster, the improvement in the talent that they brought in both through the portal and in high school recruiting, even though it's not where I think you and I, either of us, believe where it needs to be or even close, but it improved. But very little of that will matter if the product on the field doesn't get better. Now that the first year you kind of got the pass, it was the curiosity, it was fun, everyone enjoyed it. Yeah, The Rock comes up and he puts on the sunglasses and Lil Wayne comes out, runs with Ralphie. I get it. That might even happen again, but like you said, there's only so many tricks you can pull out of the bag. Can Deion Sanders have some more celebrities swing by? Of course, there's always more celebrities. Can he have a couple people show up and do more things? Of course, I get it. Already gone to the Lil Wayne bag again, though, for black and gold, so probably not going for the 3rd time. It really now just becomes, can Deion Sanders coach? We know he can promote. We know he can sell. We know he can get transfers drawn. He can be the Pied Piper when it comes to both players and to a certain extent, even assistant coaches. Now with essentially unlimited assistant coaches, guys like Warren Sapp are going to be involved in a way that he wouldn't have been a year before. He can do that, but none of it matters if it leads to wins. And if it doesn't lead to wins, not only just this year, but in the early going of this year, things can get ugly in Boulder really quickly because people are going to look at the Big 12 in a way they didn't look at the Pac-12 and go, but yeah, but look who's in the Pac-12. Look at those great teams. Yeah. You look at it right now and you do what I do. You go,
great quarterback.
Yeah, you're like, well, there's Utah and Kansas, interesting story. But I mean, there's no Oklahoma, there's no Texas, there's none of those teams. CU is on the marquee for the Big 12 as much as any other team in that conference. They are one of the things the Big 12 is selling. As much as any other team in the conference, they have to get off to a
Would you like to think, though I think it was a major reason that Deion Sanders was hired, that there was more to his hiring than getting CU back into the Big 12? I would like to think there was more behind it.
But it was a secondary concern. I don't think anyone will tell you.
The point he was hired, it was. But now that's crossed off the list. Mm-hmm. Now, whatever was number 2 behind gaining entrance back into the Big 12 becomes number one. And I think it starts with a letter W.
Media days will start on a letter W as well. Deion Sanders will take the stage in Vegas on Wednesday. Obviously, we'll talk about that when that arrives as well. But the Colorado Rockies, that's right, they're still playing, believe it or not, and they have an all-star. Of course, each team gets one, but this one actually deserves it. Did a couple other Rockies get shorted? We'll talk about the Rockies' Ryan McMahon and a couple of others, and check out where they are, because such a fascinating year in baseball. But when you want to dig deeper on the Rockies or any of the teams, Sandy has got the place for you to go.
Well, we first of all want to thank you for subscribing to the Sandy and Shawn podcast, and thank you all the time for that. We really appreciate it. Listen to our show on demand whenever it fits your schedule. But plenty of other podcasts you can listen to. Ryan Blackburn will join us later this week, keeping you up to date on what's happening with the Nuggets with the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. For hockey, it's Eric Dean, who will also be joining us later this week to talk Avs. Check out his podcast, Hockey Mountain High, or go to Mile High Baseball and read Drew Kreisman, 20th and Blake podcast, and obviously listen to him on the podcast. You can read him as well. And all questions relating to the Broncos, some of which we have addressed today, you'll find the answers and intelligent commentary with the Broncos podcast starring Troy Renk, our friend from the Denver Post, featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. All that and a lot more. Just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, let's just say that the month of June was not great for the Rockies, but in theory, the June swoon is over. I don't know if the swoon's over, but June's over, so at least there's that. But Ryan McMahon, at the age of 29, named one of the reserves to the All-Star team. McMahon makes his first All-Star appearance. It feels as if this wasn't a make-or-break season for Ryan McMahon. At the age of 29, after a 198 strikeout season last year, it felt as if McMahon was ever going to make the leap to All-Star status. It probably had to happen this year. Fortunately for the Rockies, unfortunately for McMahon, it has.
It has, and it's well-deserved. You look at all the numbers. He's among the top 2 or 3 third basemen this year in the National League. He definitely belongs in the All-Star team.
He's second in OPS among third basemen. Right. He leads the Rockies in wins above replacement with 2.5, which actually is in the top 3 among all third basemen. He's been a top 3 third baseman by any measurement.
Does he blow hot and cold? Yeah, a little bit, but so do a lot of guys. And his numbers have generally month to month been pretty steady.
Yeah, they have.
He's had his rough patches. Defensively, he's above average. Good choice, deserving choice, first time as an All-Star. And I finally came across something that General Manager Bill Schmidt said.
Okay.
With which I agree.
Oh, my.
After all the years.
Look at us starting
Bill
out this week.
Schmidt as the farm director and more recently as general manager of the Colorado Rockies. And I want to read the quote here, make sure I've got it right. This is Bill Schmidt in December at the winter meetings, talking specifically about Ryan McMahon. He's above average defensively, which makes him an average player.
Ouch.
He can be better. There are a lot of people who believe that. I believed it last year. I thought he'd break out last year. He didn't. And Bill Schmidt spoke the truth. I think that's more than fair. And Ryan McMahon, most importantly, thought it was more than fair. He says that he's had nastier things said about him by Bill Schmidt face to face. And he's also had kinder things said about him, maybe more recently by Bill Schmidt to him face to face. Bill Schmidt now says, I want to see him consistently put the ball in play, cut down on the strikeouts. He's done that. Put the ball in play. He's capable of being 260, 270 hitter, not 240. I think probably 260, 270 is a little bit too modest.
Well, he's hitting he's hitting 272 right now.
I think he should be a little better than that. But here's Schmidt. There was a point in May when he was one of the better players in the league. He's capable of doing that. I agree. From May 12th through June 19th of last year, McMahon / 349, 434, 644 with 8 home runs, 11 doubles, 2 triples, and 25 runs batted in 35 games. Then there was the summer, and that didn't go very well.
It did not.
And that's the test now for Ryan McMahon. Can he do it post All-Star break, continue producing? The Rockies, as we all know, are a very weird team. If you're judging them by what they did in March, April, and June, they're the 62 New York Mets, right on the nose. 14 wins, 42 losses.
Yuck.
If you look at the month of May and so far in July, you have a team that's 18-16 and respectable, coming off the capturing of their most recent series against the Kansas City Royals, 2 games out of 3. Kansas City Royals were closer to being a playoff team when they came to Denver than they were when they left yesterday, because they lost 2 out of 3, while the Red Sox took 2 out of 3 against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. So they went from being a half a game behind Boston to a game and a half behind Boston, thanks to the Rockies taking 2 out of 3. And if you're a Red Sox fan, you were rooting hard for the Rockies this weekend. The Rockies came through. They didn't sweep the series. They lost 10-1 yesterday, but they won the first 2 games, played very good baseball in both games, which brings us to the other very weird thing about the Rockies. Against winning teams this year, and I understand there are many more losers or non-winning teams than there are winners this year in Major League Baseball, the Rockies have played only 37 of their 90 games against winning baseball teams. But against winning teams, including this past weekend, the Kansas City Royals, Rockies are 17-20. They are basically the Chicago Cubs when they're playing winning teams. Now, the Cubs are in last place, but the Cubs are also only 5.5 games out of a wild card spot. Not completely out of contention. Nothing a 7 or 8 game winning streak couldn't change, right? So they're the Chicago Cubs against winning teams. Against non-winning teams, they are the Chicago White Sox at 15-38, if that can be believed. That's a winning percentage of .283. What is the White Sox current winning percentage in the American League Central? It would be at 26-66, .283. So imagine, we'll just talk about the Chicago teams here. Against winning teams, weird. The Rockies play like the Cubs. Against losing teams, they play like the White Sox do. And they lost 2 out of 3 to the White Sox earlier this year. By the way, they were also swept by the Cubs.
Just strange.
Who are a losing team. So being, 1-5 against the Cubs and the White Sox is illustrative of the notion that for some reason, against winning teams, they raise their game, especially at Coors Field. They've been very successful. Remember that stretch where they took a series from Cleveland?
Right.
2 games out of 3.
And that was the Phillies, right?
Also, against whom they lost 3 games in Philadelphia, but two out of 3 here in Denver.
The Rockies move away from
figure that out if you can.
Dakota Hudson, who was 2-12 in his 17 starts, the Rockies designate him for assignment. Yesterday, they called up Tanner Gordon, who then made his Rockies debut. Again, the loss to Kansas City, but he was hardly to blame entirely when you lose 10-1. That's just the way it kind of goes. But
yeah, hard to win games.
The news that might be interesting about that is that currently at AA Hartford, one Herman Marquez is working on assignment, could potentially come back as soon as next weekend. That would be very good news.
Here's the other good news.
And good news for Marquez.
Kyle Freeland's pitched very well since coming back.
He has.
Yeah, another nice game the other night. And we know how he competes. And yet, I think while he was hurt, he was able to work on some stuff, and maybe from the neck up as much as from the shoulders down. He worked on some things. 19
innings pitched since coming back and 3 earned runs.
Yep. He looks good.
That's not good. That's great.
He looks like a different guy. And I agree. And again, I haven't agreed, particularly this year, at all times with Bud Black, the manager. But he made a good point over the weekend. He said, having grown up here, this is what Kyle Freeland is used to, pitching in this environment. And we know of all the pitchers, including those on opposing teams, very good pitchers who've come in here and say, I hate pitching here for any one of a number of reasons. I just hate pitching here. Kyle Freeland does not hate pitching here. And I've always believed in part of the Yogi Berra maxim that 90% of the game is half mental. And for a pitcher in Coors Field, it's all attitude dependent. It's all attitude dependent. You know you're going to give up runs. You just have to be better than the other guy and keep your team in the game. Just be a little bit better than the other starter who probably doesn't love pitching here. And if you're Kyle Freeland, you grew up here, you've pitched here.
You got to get it in your head that this is your place.
This is your place. And it certainly was his place in 2018 when he was one of the best 4 pitchers in the National League and probably one of the 10 best pitchers in Major League Baseball.
For the Rockies, the idea that maybe a couple of their youngsters maybe got snubbed. Shortstop Ezekiel Tovar, center fielder Brenton Doyle. Doyle's rise may be the more surprising one than Tovar. But here's why I guess I would argue that maybe one was and one wasn't. Doyle, amongst the qualifying hitters, with enough plate appearances, among center fielders, first in OPS and tied for fourth in wins above replacement. So maybe there's an argument to be made there. The problem is when you're on a bad team and people aren't going to pay attention to it. But in Tovar's case, if you're looking at that and going, wow, Tovar's just barely behind McMahon in wins above replacement. How come he didn't get in there? It's because shortstop is insane right now in the major leagues and especially in the National League. In OPS, Tovar is 6th. In wins above replacement, he's 9th. Not 9th in the National League, 9th in the National League among shortstops. And he's the second best player on the Rockies, regardless of position. So some of that has to do with the fact that the shortstop position is just remarkably stacked right now, especially in the National League. So perhaps, those guys could be in there, one or both even as reserves. As
somebody gets hurt,
or, they don't opt out like they used to, but things happen. There's a possibility within the next week, the All-Star game in Arlington on July 16th. The Rockies take on the Reds. The Rockies 32-58.
Bad news. Losing team and the double whammy. They're playing them on the road.
On the road. First of a 4-game series.
And they lost all 3 games to them here.
Yep. The Reds, an exciting team with a lot of interesting talent. It hasn't all bubbled up, but they can potentially be explosive. Ellie De La Cruz is worth the price of admission. And for the Rockies, at least the bright side is they may have some opportunities to have the pitching matchup in their advantage. Tonight, Feltner takes on Abbott and then Quantrill on Montas. Of course, Montas shut them down last time. Freeland and Gomber to finish.
Very quickly, we're just past the midway point of the season. We were off last week. Standings basically didn't change. 27 of the 30 teams in Major League Baseball in their last 10 games have gone 5-5, 4-6, or 6-4. The only 3 teams different: Minnesota at 7-3, Baltimore at 7-3, and the all of a sudden collapsing New York Yankees at 3-7. That's it. The other 27 teams, 15 are 5-5 on the nose. Half the teams in Major League Baseball in the last 10 games are 5-5. Including your Colorado Rockies.
Who can't bother looking at the standings now. They just got to take it one game at a time, but perhaps Freeland's getting better. Marquez appears to be getting better. Some of the young players are bubbling up. McMahon gets the confidence of his first all-star appearance. Maybe the Rockies in their last few games before the break will have an opportunity to look pretty good and perhaps give themselves a chance of being respectable. They are still 26 games under 500. That will do it for us. Tomorrow, Ryan Blackburn will join us for the latest on the Nuggets. They had Dario Šarić in the free agency period. They are still looking at adding potentially Russell Westbrook. If you missed any part of this show, don't miss what Sandy talked about, the idea of Russell Westbrook involved in that, but we'll talk to Ryan tomorrow. Danny Bailey is the man who makes all of this work. Thanks to Danny and thanks to you. However you catch the show, whether you're watching it on YouTube or how you're streaming it on Mile High Sports or you're catching it on the radio, however you're doing it, we really appreciate it. If you happen to be watching it on YouTube, there's a little red button right under you that says subscribe. Go ahead and do that, and we'll give you the opportunity to get notified when we're about to come on, what we're about to talk about. You'll have all that in your pocket. And of course, you can catch this whenever you'd like on demand as well. We'll be back at it tomorrow, but we will step aside for today. We appreciate each and every one of you being there. Hopefully you're back from rested and tanned as you can get. Not me. All I get is sunburn, but what are you going to do? He's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. We'll catch you tomorrow right here at Mile High Sports.